When we mention the UFC pound-for-pound rankings, the first name that comes to mind is John Jones or even Kamaru Usman. But as people like to say, there is a new sheriff in town as of November 2022. The #1 spot on that list belongs to the Australian fighter of Macedonian origin, Alexander the Great Volkanovski. However, climbing up to the top and preparing to defend the pound-for-pound crown against the lightweight champion Islam Makhachev is going to be more challenging than a Sunday morning. It will take blood, sweat, and tears to keep the position where he is now. So the question is, how did Volk begin his sports career as a rugby player, which later helped him become the most dominant UFC champion today? And what does the future hold for the best Australian UFC fighter to ever enter the octagon? From a rugby player to a UFC champion, we present you with Alexander Volkanovski's journey to the top. Alex started his sports career as a rugby player where he weighed 97 kilograms, that's 214 pounds for the Americans. He played for Warilla Gorillas, a rugby team that was part of a semi-professional rugby league in the South Coast Rugby League competition. His shorter stature, 5 feet 6, wasn't an issue to stop the young Volk from tackling enormously big rugby guys, considering that he trained in Greco-Roman wrestling at an early age, even winning a national title as a 12-year-old. On the field, he played as a front rower, and he wasn't only participating but even enjoyed a relatively successful career in the sport. Such examples are the 2010 Mick Cronin Medal as the league's best player, and leading his team to the 2011 Premiership when he was acknowledged as man of the match after his team Warilla won the grand finale against Gerringong.
And now the man of the match in the grand final for 2011. From the Warilla Lake South Gorillas, their prop forward number 10, Alex Volkanovski.
Regardless of that relative success, tackling rugby players and scoring touchdowns weren't satisfying Volk's appetites enough, so he decided to leave rugby at 23 years of age to focus on an MMA career. Volkanovski started training in MMA relatively late, at 22. But transitioning from rugby to MMA wasn't as hard as it seemed. Even though these waters were new for Volk to explore, his Greco-Roman wrestling credentials and clinching huge rugby guys greatly impacted his smooth transition to MMA and contributed in a big way, thanks to the grappling techniques he learned from Greco-Roman wrestling. Mixed with the explosivity, cardio, and strength he acquired from rugby, he rapidly became a great offensive wrestler, as well as a good counter-striker with a powerful overhand right. Yes, that's the truth, even though McGregor would call him a slappy wrestler with an overhand right. Remember that the young Volk used to weigh 97 kilograms. Considering that, he didn't just cut all that weight to compete at featherweight. Instead, he had to adjust, fighting in welterweight and middleweight divisions before slowly cutting weight and adjusting to the division where he now rules, the featherweight. Volkanovski immediately realized that his true passion lies in MMA, so he'll decide to leave rugby forever to pursue an MMA career. This is what he had to say about that. There are no excuses in fighting. You can be playing a team sport and have a good game, and you can lose. In fighting, it's all on me. If I go out there and lose, then it's my fault. I like that. He started his MMA career as an amateur at middleweight with a record of 4-0 before turning professional in 2012 when he fought Gerhard Voigt and won the fight by unanimous decision. Getting Dana White's attention and signing with the UFC was quite difficult for the Australian fighter. Even though he won the Pacific Extreme Combat title and 2 Australian Fighting Championship featherweight titles, he was still out of the UFC's signing radar. However, there was a hidden secret of how Volk finally managed to put his name on the map. That secret was the thousands of Macedonian fans he had back then. Volkanovski's family originates from the small village of Baransai, a village in the city of Bitola region, which is in the Republic of Macedonia. The city of Bitola was founded by King Philip II, the father of Alexander the Great. Now you see the connection and why he coined the nickname the Great. His initial nickname back then was the Hulk. By changing his nickname to the Great, not only he reminded the world where he came from, but he gained the love and support of thousands of Macedonian fans worldwide. His name was all over Macedonian news and newspapers. To get UFC's attention, he launched a campaign asking fans to comment on every video related to MMA with the hashtag #Volkanovski. Many Macedonian sites on social networks like Facebook accepted that campaign and asked fans for support. Surely enough, his popularity jumped to another level, so he would later sign with the UFC, which would change his life forever. By the time Alex got to the UFC, He had gained enough fighting experience to run through anyone they had put in front of him. Starting from a wrestler with a good overhand right, he quickly turned into a complete martial artist. Soon enough, his stand-up would become as good as his wrestling. Volkanovski made his UFC debut in November 2016 against Yusuke Kasuya at UFC Fight Night 101. He proved a superior wrestler by controlling the Japanese fighter on the ground before finishing him in the second round via TKO. His debut was pure domination and indicated that he possesses a power that nobody should reckon with. Interestingly enough, this fight took place at lightweight. Still, shortly after, Volk announced that he would move to featherweight, a division that he would make his home.
I wasn't happy just to make the UFC. I want to hit these top ranks. Smallest featherweight in the division.
He won the next 2 bouts by unanimous decision, displaying his power and dominance in the octagon. Before the UFC matched him against the undefeated Canadian prospect Jeremy Kennedy, even though many thought that the Canadian fighter would make Volk run for his money, he wasn't a match for the more superior Australian fighter who dominated him over the fight before the TKO finish at the end of the second round. Alex got another unanimous decision victory on his record against Darren Elkins, a fighter known for his endurance and ability to absorb damage. If there were doubts about whether Volk could compete with the best,
and he still wants to brawl. That left jab. Crowd is loving it as we hit the final minute.
Now was the time to prove the doubters wrong. Chad Mendes was a 3-time title challenger, always on top of the game. Up to that point, his only losses were caused by legends like Jose Aldo, Frankie Edgar, and Conor McGregor. In a back-and-forth fight full of unpredictability and excitement, Alex managed to overpower Mendes and finish him with punches late in the second round. And now was the time for the biggest challenge of his career, and what more significant challenge than the King of Rio himself, Jose Aldo. Aldo is arguably the best featherweight of all time, and to be the best, you gotta beat the best. Winning fights and climbing to the top is one thing, but beating a legend like Aldo is something completely different and would emphasize your name like nothing else. This was something that Volk knew very well, and he even agreed to fight in Jose Aldo's house in Rio de Janeiro. This fight was relatively different than his previous one against Mendes. Nonetheless, he defeated the legend by unanimous decision in a fight where the judges had little difficulty deciding who was the winner.
By unanimous decision, Alexander the Great!
There was no finish, but a statement was made. Volkanovski is now knocking on the title challenge door. The UFC featherweight champion at the time, Max Holloway, seemed unstoppable. He beat Jose Aldo twice, and fans and journalists, including Joe Rogan, considered him the greatest featherweight fighter of all time. Max did not ask for that reputation. He earned it. The height and reach advantage between Holloway and Volkanovski were enormous, and many believed that Max would pick Volkanovski apart in the stand-up. Their first fight occurred on December 14, 2019, in Las Vegas. Once again, Alex proved his doubters wrong by outclassing the champion in the stand-up exchanges, beating him on the scorecards, and making a point against the popular belief that he is just a wrestler. Suppose Holloway was considered the best striker in the division. What did that make Volkanovski after beating him in his own game? Since Max is a fan favorite, many UFC fans wanted to see an immediate rematch, hoping that this time their favorite fighter would win. Unfortunately for them, in a very close fight, Volk will again have his hands raised in the octagon, beating Max on the scorecards again, this time by a split decision. Even though Alex would start slow in that fight and lose the first 2 rounds, he would make some crucial adjustments mid-fight that would grant him victory at the end. That was a championship mentality displayed at its best. Now, nobody could doubt the great anymore.
On his attempts, final seconds of this championship fight, and a late takedown for
Volkanovski was scheduled to face submission specialist Brian Ortega in his second championship defense. This bout would be part of the show Ultimate Fighter 29, where they would be the coaches and fight in the season finale. Ortega is a feared jiu-jitsu wizard, and everyone knows that one mistake is all it takes for Brian to win a fight at any moment. When they met in the octagon and Ortega got Volk into a deep-mounted guillotine choke, it seemed that this would be the end of Alexander's reign as a champion. To this day, people are trying to figure out how Volk could escape from such a position. That was a choke that would make anyone tap.
Oh my goodness, mounted guillotine by Ortega!
He might go to sleep. The grip is broken.
Anyone but Volkanovski. If that wasn't enough, shortly after escaping the guillotine, Alex was caught in a triangle choke, and he escaped that too. That's something you cannot train. You either have it or you don't. Was it that Alexander the Great gene that helped him withstand? regardless of any explanation. That was a pure display of a warrior's heart, and in the warrior's code, there's no surrender. Besides those 2 submission attempts, the fight was one-sided in Alex's favor, reigning supreme again. And, of course, the biggest mismatch in Volk's career was his next title defense against the Korean Zombie. He made the Korean fighter look like he had never fought before, scoring 3 knockdowns before finishing the fight via TKO in the 4th round. The scariest thing about this newly evolved version of Volk was that he made it look easy, and to close the door to any doubt about who is the better fighter between him and Holloway, they were scheduled to fight for the 3rd time. Max wasn't given a present, but he earned that #1 contender spot again by beating 2 of the top featherweight contenders, Calvin Kattar and Yair Rodriguez. However, sadly for Max, their 3rd fight will be one-sided domination by the Australian fighter, closing that Max Holloway chapter forever. Completely clearing the division by beating and dominating everyone they put in front of him opened new horizons for Volk. The question that opened in addition to that was, what is next for Volk and who can possibly beat this monster? And that question was answered by the new UFC lightweight champion of the world, Islam Makhachev. After a dominant performance against the uncrowded champ Charles Oliveira, the Russian fighter Islam Makhachev did not waste time calling Volkanovski out for the #1 pound-for-pound spot. Being the warrior he is, Volk accepted the challenge, and now we are looking forward to a huge fight that should happen on February 12, 2023 at UFC 284. After a long time, Alex is the underdog again, and for a good reason. Makhachev is an absolute monster and arguably the best wrestler in the whole UFC. The Russian is on an 11-fight winning streak and intends to become the pound-for-pound king. The biggest reason people see Volkanovski as the underdog is the size factor. Makhachev is way bigger and taller than Volk, and if he could dominate all the big guys in the lightweight division, then Volk should not be a problem, right? Well, not really. Volkanovski used to tackle and clinch with rugby guys twice the size of Makhachev, and that is something that is not familiar to him. Speaking of the size factor, his former Gorilla teammate Ngadai Hatet in an interview with The Athletic revealed how Volkanovski used to slam men far bigger than him regularly. His opposition was 3 times bigger, and he was the best in the whole league. These guys are heavyweights like Brock Lesnar, said Hatet. He had no fear, no matter how big they were, and even if someone twice the size of him started picking on him or tried to fight him, he would clean them up, continued Hatet. So, if we take the size factor, Makhachev might be a bit of a better wrestler than Volk, but Volk is a way better striker than Islam, which makes this fight so intriguing. If Alex wins this fight, he will enter into the GOAT conversation and slowly but surely put his name next to GSP and Anderson Silva. If he loses, he will still be the undisputed featherweight champion, keep cleaning the division, cementing his status as the best featherweight ever. But if he wins and becomes a double champ, that would open many doors and opportunities. He would become one of the biggest superstars in the sport, and everyone would like to watch him fight. Imagine Volk defending his title against someone like Oliveira, Gaethje, or Poirier. Regardless of any outcome, the UFC future of Volk is bright, and we are witnessing a superstar on the rise and a potential UFC GOAT.